Hey everyone, I'm Nathan, owner and creator of Built for Birds. Today I'm going to show you a video how to build a birdhouse from a design that my sister showed me. This is going to be for her birthday. She wanted me to build her this birdhouse, and so I told her that I couldn't make it exactly as what she wanted, but I can make something similar. And so I'll show you a picture of the picture she showed me, and we're going to build this birdhouse for her birthday. Here's the design. You can see how it has a couple hearts on it. It's got an overhang and a little space on the bottom for the birds to perch. So what I'm using is I'm using two 8 by 5.5 inch pieces. This is 1/2 inch thick pine. These are going to be the front and back of the birdhouse. And what I did was I took my jigsaw and I cut these angles. These are about a 40-degree angle. And then we will, what we'll do is I'll take my router and my sander to sand and route out these edges. And then I also have two 8 by 6 inch piece or 8 by 5.5 inch pieces that I'll use for the top of the birdhouse. I have two 6 by 5.5 inch pieces that I will use for the other two sides of the birdhouse. And I'm going to use a 1/4 inch piece of lumen board for the bottom of the birdhouse. So the first step will be to take our front and back pieces and we're going to sand and route the edges so we can round out the edges nice and smooth. Okay, so I got the front and back pieces, and what I've done is I've clamped them to my wood bench, my workbench, and we're going to sand the edges of these real good and get them nice and clean. And I'm using my orbital sander. I got 60 grit sandpaper on my sander. Okay, so I got my two pieces, the front and back pieces of the birdhouse, nice and sanded on the top. And now I'm going to take my router and I'm going to route the edges to round out the edges nice and round. And I'm just using a router with a round bit, edge bit, to round out the edges. And how I'm going to do it is I have this little clamp here on my workbench, and I basically just clamp the pieces onto my little clamp here, and then I use my router to get to the edges. Okay, and once I've done running my router to round out the edges, I'll give it I'll take my sander and sand it again to get it nice and smooth. Okay, so I'm going to take the front panel and I'm going to drill a hole kind of on the side because that's what the design shows. And I'm kind of estimated kind of 3/4 from the bottom of the panel, roughly to where the hole should be on the right side of the panel. And I'm going to use this unibit. It's about 1.25 inches. And I think that using these triangular unibits are a little bit easier, especially if you're drilling holes in something as thin as a 1/2 inch thickness on a piece of wood. So I'm going to drill this hole for the front panel of the birdhouse. Okay, so I'm going to take some sandpaper and sand this out real good. But that will be the front of the birdhouse. Okay, so the next step will be is we're going to take the side pieces and I'm going to use my router and round out the edges just like I did with the front and back pieces. So what I did was using my router table, I took a 1/4 inch router bit and on these side panels, I made a 1/4 inch groove all the way across the bottom. You can see here this 1/4 inch groove. And what that's going to be for, it's going to be for the bottom, this 1/4 inch board that's going to slide right into that groove. And that will become the bottom of the birdhouse. Okay, so what I'm going to do next, I'm going to go ahead and stain the pieces individually. And I'm going to use some of this amber wood stain. And then after I stain it, we'll put it together. And then I'm going to put an epoxy finish when it's all done. All right, so I got my pieces stained like I want them, and now we're going to glue and nail this together. So I have my two side pieces that I'm going to glue and nail together to the front and back side. So we're going to just take some of our wood glue and we'll put some wood glue on the edges. And I'm going to use my air nailer. This is my finish nailer. And I'm using they're about 1.25 inch nails in here. You can certainly, this is an air gun, but you can certainly get a cordless nailer, brad nailer if you wanted to use that, or just use screws or other nails if you wanted to. But I'm going to make this a little bit easier and use my air gun. And then we will flip this over and we'll do the other side. Okay, so here's what we have so far. And now what we'll do is we'll go ahead and put the tops on. So in the picture, they had the overhang in the front. And so we'll make sure that we have an overhang in the front. It looks, it's about 1.5 inch overhang. Okay, so here's what we got so far. And we still have to do the bottom. And what I'm going to do for the bottom is this piece here, which is our 1/4 inch board, is going to slide right here in the into the grooves, but I have to trim it down a little bit because it's still just a little bit wide. So I'm going to use my table saw and trim this down about 1/4 to 1/2 inch. And then I'm also going to cut the corners and kind of round out the edges, instead of it looking like just a square platform, it'll be a more of a semicircle platform and give it just a little bit better look. Okay, so I took my piece here and I just used my circular saw and I cut off the edges, and I took my router and my sander and just kind of smoothed it all out. I didn't quite get a semicircle like I wanted, but I wanted to round at the edges so it didn't look as boxy. And so the panel will just slide right into the grooves at the bottom, and you can see that will allow access to clean out the bird feeder. Okay, the next step is to add the epoxy finish. And so I'm going to take a minute and explain how I mix the epoxy, and then I will show you in the video how we mix and apply the epoxy. So epoxy comes in two parts, A and B. And what I like to do is I'll take these little Dixie cups and I will pour equal amounts in each, and then I will mix them into another cup together. Now, epoxy is kind of a pain to use. It's very sticky. It's hard to work with. You have to make sure that you mix it very well and that you get your proportions equal, or otherwise it doesn't harden right. But I like epoxy because it's very strong. It acts kind of like a glue. It holds things together very well. It's waterproof. And one of the greatest aspects of epoxy is it covers up some of your mistakes. And so that's always nice if you're trying to, you know, cover up some of the blemishes of whatever you're working with. And so it's just a really nice finish. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some color to it. So my sister, her favorite color is green. And what I use are these mica powders. And I'm going to take a couple scoops of this mica powder, which is green, and mix that into the epoxy. And that's going to give this kind of a green tint to the birdhouse. And it looks really smooth and it really stands out. So epoxy is a finish that I would recommend if you feel like going through the hassle of using epoxy. So when I put on the epoxy, I just use a chip brush and just kind of paint it on. And it's going to take a few coats. So what I have to do is I have to do this a couple times and maybe even 3 times. That way you get plenty of color and you get plenty of finish onto the birdhouse. so you can kind of see I got one coat on there so far, and it'll take a couple more coats, and each coat will give it a little bit more color, and it's kind of a pastel green. The mica powder isn't real bright, but it kind of keeps it, kind of makes it kind of a pastel color, but it'll add color each coat that we put onto it. And something else about the epoxy is that when you put it on, you don't need a whole lot. When I paint it on, I just use very little, and it goes pretty far. And also, I put this on top of wax paper. I find that the wax paper works best to keep the epoxy from sticking to the surface. I have this in a metal pan, and if you try to do it on anything else, you're going to have a hard time getting the birdhouse off of the pan or whatever you use. So the wax paper really kind of helps it from sticking and bonding. So the wax paper seems to work best so it doesn't stick to the surface that you're working with. And what I also like about epoxy, I wanted to mention, is that the epoxy really seals everything up pretty well. It will go into the cracks and the crevices and form a barrier against elements and being outside, and it just really makes it very strong, almost indestructible. It's a really nice finish. So I'm going to let this dry and put another coat or two on it, and then we'll be ready for the final step. All right, so I wanted to show you how the epoxy dries, and you can see how the epoxy sticks to the wax paper. And so because of that, where all the epoxy drained to the bottom and just dried. And so what I'm going to do to get this off is I'm actually going to take a torch and heat this, and that's going to make the epoxy real soft. And then I'm going to take a scraper and take my straight edge razor blade knife, and I'm just going to cut that off. And if you don't have a torch, you could use a heat gun. Anything like that would work, where you could just heat this up and then the epoxy will come off. So once I get it to a point where I have scraped off as much of the excess epoxy that I can, I'm going to let this dry again and harden a little bit more. And then I'm going to take my sander, my Orville sander, and I'll sand it down real good. And then I will do another coat of epoxy. And so epoxy is something that can be a very nice finish, but it's kind of a pain to work with. And there's certainly many other things that you can do besides epoxy to finish your birdhouses. So here's the final product. And what I did is I went ahead and painted a couple hearts on the front. And I put a picture hanging bracket on the back that you could hang it with if you wanted to. Okay, so that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. I guess I'm going to find out if my sister watched the video because I haven't given her the birdhouse yet. If you liked the video, like and subscribe. And until next time, go watch some birds.